let's assume that there is a meaningful ground of reality, and then let's assume that there's a framing system that you have to use to deal with that, and that's partly biological, but it's also partly a consequence of enculturation. And then let's assume that that framing system can get outdated. So that's all associated with the stories that we've been talking about so far. So then let's assume that the fact that it can be outdated is also an existential problem. So it's a constant problem. So that not only do you need to have a framing system, but you need to have a mechanism that you can engage in to update the framing system optimally. And then we can take that one step further and say, that's built right into you. It's part of your nature, it's part of your biology, it's part of the structure of your consciousness. And then we can say, well, here's a hypothesis. What if that's what's happening when you get engaged with something? You know, so imagine what your brain is trying to do, roughly speaking, is to situate you in relationship to being so that you can both tolerate it, you can tolerate it, appreciate it, frame it, and stay on top of it. And that your mind has to be able to signal to you when you're doing that. And I think that's what happens when you're captured by something and you get engaged in it. Is what's happening is your mind is telling you, your experience is telling you, you're exactly situated in the right place. You're stable enough so you're not going to fall apart, but you're fluid enough so that you're not going to fall prey to excess stability. And then the experience of that is an experience of engaged meaning, but there are phenomena that are associated with that too, like it's easy to pay attention. It's just straightforward. It's easy to pay attention to things that you're engaged by. And I think that that's because your mind, roughly speaking, your brain, knows that information flow is maximized there. So you're not going to be terrified and you're not going to be bored. You're going to be engaged. You don't fall apart and you stay updated. And so the way you experience that is that the meaning is optimized under those conditions. You're deep into the material, so to speak. And it's meaningful. It's directly meaningful. Yes?
So would this be a framework to explain why, say, novel music or stories or like an engrossing video game even would induce that kind of stress? It's like,
sure.
You know it's another world, so you're safe, but also it's like an unfolding experience within.
It's both of those at the same time, because it's you don't want to play a video game where there are no rules.
Yeah.
And you don't want to play a video game where the rules transform so rapidly and erratically that there's no way you can model them. You want to play a video game where you can suspend disbelief. You know, there's some play with the axioms, so maybe there's some things about the modeled reality that aren't exactly like real reality. But once that framework is established, once the rule-governed framework is established, there's play inside of it, and that's very engrossing. And I think part of the reason it's engrossing is, one, you actually learn things from playing games, because in some sense you're always playing a game, right? Because you're always inside a reality that's bounded by a certain set of assumptions, and it's not the total reality. It's like a game-like representation of the total reality, and you know, hopefully it's a good enough game-like representation. You know, one of the things I was thinking about in relationship to video games was, you know, I've read critiques of video games where people complain about young people generally being engaged in video games to the expense of having a real life. And then I was thinking, I don't know if you know about Edward, I think his name is Edward Castronova. Now he's an economist who studied video games, and he did this quite a while ago. I think it's got to be more than 10 years ago now. But he made the claim at that point that one of the big, massive online player games, I think it was World of Warcraft, but that might be wrong, was like the 20th largest economy in the world. Really, not in any fake way, partly because you could sell artifacts that you were producing on eBay, for example, but also partly because people traded within it. And like there was no reason to assume that the additional level of abstraction that that video game represented was necessarily any more abstract than what we were already doing in economies. So then you could ask yourself, for example, think about this. Is it more real to lead a band of adventurers through a complex mythological reality in an online game, or to work at McDonald's. Now you'd say, well, to work at McDonald's because that's real, but let's think about that for a minute. So exactly why is it real? I mean, first of all, McDonald's couldn't exist unless it was nested in a whole bunch of other things, right? So it has to be nested in a functional capitalist economy, and that has to be nested inside a functional political system, and then there's all sorts of other preconditions in terms of material supply and so forth that have to be in place before you're able to work there and receive tokens for your labor. Okay, so the same thing applies to the video game. And you might say, well, how do you determine which of those is real? And I would say, well, maybe one of the ways of determining whether a game is real is to what degree do you practice a wide range of the subsets of skills that would be transferable to other games while you're playing that game. And I think you could make a case that if you're playing a very complex video game, that the activities that you're engaging in, which involve leadership and cooperation and communication and problem solving, are actually a more comprehensive subset of the skills that you would have to develop to work in the world as a complex place than what you would pick up at McDonald's. Now, you know, obviously you can argue about that, but it's not self-evident. So back to framing. Well, you know, one of the things the video game, and types of meaning, one of the things that the video game designers really try to do is put you in the zone of proximal development. Now, that's a term from Vygotsky, who was a Russian developmental psychologist, who was probably the most influential developmental psychologist apart from Piaget. Now, what Vygotsky noticed was that when parents talk to their children, they talk to them constantly at a level that slightly exceeded what they could comprehend. And you think, that's so cool, eh? Because on the one hand, they're communicating with their children because the children can understand what they're saying. But on the other hand, they're teaching them to communicate, to understand more things at the same time. They're doing that at exactly the same time. And he thought of that as the zone of proximal development because it was sort of dragging the kids past their current state of comprehension and understanding and framing into the next set. And it's sort of analogous to the principle that I had mentioned to you earlier about playing a game in a manner that not only helps you win that game, but helps you win all the other games that you're going to play after you play that game. And that's playing the game at the zone of proximal development because it involves generalization. And I would say that, you know, one of the real debates in psychology, and it's an appalling debate as far as I'm concerned, is what is it that you can use to buttress yourself against the undeniable catastrophes of existence? You know, because it's obvious to everyone that existence is tragic in its fundamental essence, right? Because people are limited and flawed and mortal. It's like, that's a big problem. Now, hypothetically, that was addressed quite well by traditional religious structures. But then our ability to assume that they were reasonable ways of framing existence is being badly damaged or called into question by the rise of scientific, materialistic, and objective thinking. So the psychological, like the academic psychological response to that has been in many ways that, well, your inframing only shields you from the tragedy of being, and that's what it is. It's a defense mechanism, and that's the terror management, guys. It's right. Fundamentally, your basic problem is that you're terrified of dying. There's not a bloody thing that can be done about that, so you have to, you know, put up shields of various sorts so that you're not constantly assaulted by that problem as you go through your life. And it's a variant of Freudian theory. So that's one theory, and then there's a variant theory, which is positive illusions, you know, which is the idea that it's closely related, is that you can just delude yourself in an optimal way about the structure of being so that you can pretend that things are going to work out better for you than they probably are, and then you don't have to be worried about the fact that it's tragic because you just concentrate on your simplistic, optimistic, you know, illusions. It's like, those are damn dismal theories, because they basically say that if you woke up and opened your eyes, what you see would be so terrible that you would die. Or that you would want to die, that it would drive you to suicide. You got to be careful before you tell people that that sort of thing is true, because you're undermining their capacity to live a genuine existence. And you're also saying, well, you can't live a genuine existence because the weight of it would be so heavy that it would destroy you, or it would drive you into a position where you wanted to be destroyed. It's like, well, before we get so damn pessimistic about it, we might start thinking about whether there are other phenomena that aren't illusory or delusional or defense mechanisms that actually are characterized by meaning. And so, one of the things I suggested to you at the beginning of this class, was that you watched what you said to find out if what you said was making you stronger or weaker, and that you can actually feel that. That's kind of a Rogerian idea, because Rogers would say that if what you're saying wasn't in sync with your embodied being, roughly speaking, because Rogers was really an embodied theorist, that you would feel that as a kind of discordance, and that would weaken you. And so, it's a much older and deeper idea than that, but Rogers articulated it very well. Well, there's another experiment that you can run that's also very much worth attending to, which is watch and see what's meaningful. Don't think about it. Just notice when you're engaged in something enough so that the fact of you doing it is sufficient for the task. Because you could say, so think about it this way. Okay, well, you're a bounded creature, and so you're beset on all sides by tragedy and limitation. Now that might be necessary. There may be a reason why that's the case, but we won't bother with that at the moment. We'll talk about that later. The question then is, are there conditions under which you would regard that as acceptable? And the answer isn't, well, I'll think about it. That's the wrong answer. The right answer is, I'll pay attention and notice if there are times like that. And I think that's Horace, that noticing. That's the I. It's not thinking, because it's not the framing process. It's something outside of that. It's something that's watching. And I think if you notice, you'll see, if you go through your week, you'll notice, because you have to sort of stand outside yourself and think, aha, I was really into that. I was pulled right inside it. And then you see phenomena that occur along with that, which Csikszentmihalyi has detailed recently in his work on flow. You don't notice the passing of time. You're not self-conscious. And the activity is sustaining. You experience it as sustaining, even though it might be difficult. So it's not a matter of just taking the easy way out and doing something fun. It's not that at all. It can be that. It's often you feel that way when you're doing something that's exceptionally challenging and difficult. And usually I think it's those things that they're real in relationship to your goal hierarchy. So they're moving you forward in the way that you've determined that moving forward is appropriate, insofar as you've sorted that out. So, A implies B, and B implies C, and C implies D, and so forth, and you've sorted that all out. So maybe you're working on an essay in a class that you find meaningful because you want to derive something useful from your education so that you're a good citizen, so that you can live a proper life, And so the chaining of all those things makes the local activity quite richly meaningful because it's properly contextualized. But then there's the other element, which is when you're pushing yourself beyond that, not only do you experience the meaning of what you're doing in relationship to your goal hierarchy, you also transcend the goal hierarchy at the same time, so that while you're working towards realizing it, you're also working towards transforming it and improving it. All at the same time. And I think that you're set up to experience that as the highest form of being. And then there's a corollary to that, which is maybe if you spent the bulk of your time doing that, so you got practiced at it, so you were doing it, well, maybe I don't know, you can figure it out for yourself, but my suspicions are that for many of you, that's probably 5% of your weekly life. Maybe I'm wrong about that, because it's been a long time since I was your age. I can't remember what it was like, really, But I do know, when I survey undergraduates and I ask them how much time they waste, you know, they're telling me, generally speaking, it's 4 to 6 hours a day. And I actually think it's probably more than that. And so that's time not spent in this particular state of mind, you know, and it's wasted time. Well, you even recognize it as wasted time because when someone asks you if it's wasted time, you say yes. And it's like, well, wasted, if it's wasted and you know it, you're obviously comparing that to some other sort of time that isn't wasted, right? That you regard as valuable and meaningful and worth engaging in, even though it might be difficult and require discipline and all those sorts of things. So you might ask yourself, you know, if you have times during the week where you're engaged enough in what you're doing so that you find that intrinsically meaningful and it removes the burden of tragedy, and I don't mean because you're preoccupied, I mean because you're experiencing what you're doing as intrinsically worth the price. That's a different thing. You might think, okay, well what if you were in that state of mind 80% of the time, or 85% of the time, or 90% of the time? You know, and that requires a tremendous amount of discipline and organization and clarity of purpose, and it also requires a tremendous amount of truth. Because the enemy of setting yourself up so that you can do that is untruth. Because what happens is, to the degree that you engage in untruth, you contaminate your frames fundamentally. And then you're in real trouble. Because you won't be oriented properly if your frames are contaminated, and they're contaminated to the degree that you build them out of nonsense and delusion.